I'm your host on Inside Vietnam.
This is a fantastic market because of the strength of the population.
You have to Vietnamize your content here.
I would tell them to come on board, tell them what they like, or give them what they like.
Vietnam is a very, very dynamic and exciting market.
Greetings everyone, my name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Vietnam is recently seen as a very attractive destination for foreign investors with an improved business environment and rising trade confidence index. Now, according to the Global Enabling Trade Index Report 2010 released by the World Economic Forum, Vietnam's ranking has jumped 18 places from the number 89 in 2009 to number 71 in 2010 among 125 economies worldwide. According to the 2010 FDI Confidence Index released by AT Kearney, Vietnam ranked number 12 out of more than 80 countries to be most trusted by international investing community. So despite the coming behind China, India, Brazil, Germany, and Poland on the list of the 5 most attractive investment destinations, Vietnam still tops the list of Southeast Asian nations, followed by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. In order to provide the investment communities with sufficient and up-to-date information about Vietnam as a rising market in Southeast Asia and in the global economy, Inside Vietnam will bring you the insights into the market through our in-depth interviews with 26 experts who are investors or managing foreign investment firms in Vietnam in various key sectors. We're very happy today to have Mr. Ralph Matthias on the show, on our first show. And the topic of the show is regional segmentation and overview of the market. Just a short bio on Ralph. Ralph established TNS Vietnam in 1996 as part of the TNS Global Group. His responsibilities not only cover the 10 offices of TNS nationwide, but also includes Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. TNS is currently servicing such multinational clients as Unilever, Ford, IBM, Nokia, GE Money, AIG, UNICEF, and covers key sectors which includes automotive, business and finance, FMCG, healthcare, technology, retail, media, and social and public research. Thank you very much, Ralph, for joining us today to be on the first show. Probably the first question I would ask would be your personal confidence level towards Vietnam as a market.
As you say, I've been here 16 years. And to be honest, as someone who works for a global company, it's not typically my investment. I'm actually working for someone's investment. But having said that, I myself am investing in Vietnam right now in the format of a property and a home. And I can also say the last 5-6 years is what's actually changed my viewpoint on Vietnam in terms of feeling confident and comfortable.
Let's start with the first question. Everybody talks about Vietnam, and Vietnam is on the rise at the moment. Would you be able to give us an overview of the population and demographics of Vietnam?
Vietnam's population has grown by roughly about almost 1 million people a year for about the past 15, 16 years. So today our population is about 86 million people, okay? Having said that, that actually makes Vietnam the 6th largest population in Asia and the 13th largest globally. Vietnam actually has a very controlled population growth, and it's something that the government is actually quite concerned about.
So what's the urban and suburban or rural split in Vietnam at the moment, and how's that impacting the consumer market in Vietnam?
Presently, you've got about 30% of the population that lives in urban Vietnam, and 70% that is in rural Vietnam. Suffice it to say, urban Vietnam, the 10 key cities, actually make up 29% or 30% of the population, but 50% of the GDP in terms of the cities themselves.
Oh, okay.
But if you look at the actual split, rural Vietnam holds 60% of GDP and urban Vietnam holds 40%. So the point simply is that there's still a huge amount of opportunity with respect to population demographics. On average, a city like Ho Chi Minh City, which is 7.5 million, has roughly about 200,000 Vietnamese moving into the city every year. Hanoi, which is officially about 6.5 million, is obviously the second largest city, and then you have Haiphong and a few others. but there's actually only 4 cities and over 1 million people, but 2 of them are mega cities, and that's Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City.
The Ministry of Planning and Investment's Foreign Investment Agency reported that committed foreign direct investment capital from January to October was 12.79 billion, down 41.9% against the same period last year. There were 752 newly registered projects and 210 expanded projects, down 19.1% and 34.4% against the corresponding period, respectively. However, analysts said that the decline did not mean Vietnam was less attractive to foreign investors, but it reflected downward global FDI inflows. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, global FDI in the third quarter declined against the second quarter and the same period last year, after 4 quarters of slow recovery in the wake of global financial crisis. Although the economy was facing challenges like high inflation, trade deficits, a weakened local currency, and poor infrastructure, many foreign investors appreciated the nation's growth potential. Vietnam was ranked 12th for attracting FDI among markets this year, according to a recent survey by international consulting group A.T. Kearney. The most attractive sectors were healthcare, consumer goods, financial services, energy, especially environmental-friendly energy, and high technology. The nation has set goals to balance investment among sectors and localities and draw investment in environmental protection, real estate development, and technology transfer, using preferential taxation. It will also focus on administrative reform and inadequate infrastructure and human resources, as well as increasing the professionalism of investment promotion efforts. A lot of people actually talk about, when they talk about Vietnam, they talk about Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. But I've seen you as in TNS tracking 10 cities across Vietnam. So have you seen any sort of development in terms of population in those cities, apart from Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi?
All urban centers are growing. They may not be growing at the sort of breakneck speed, if you will, that Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City have been. But everybody, or not everybody, but again, it looks like about 1% to 0.5% is moving into the urban areas every year. And I think the best way to put it, 15 years ago, close to 60% of Vietnam's GDP was derived from agriculture. Today it's less than 25%. So obviously the jobs are all in manufacturing, commercial services, so on and so forth. And that obviously attracts the population, especially a young population.
The young population of Vietnam, yeah. Asia in general and Vietnam specifically has been talked about as having an extremely young population. Everybody talks about young population, but can you give us an overview of the pyramid of population in Vietnam so that we understand a bit more?
For the longest time, people kept on saying that about 60% of the population is under 25. Right now, 35% of the population is under 20 years old. However, in the next 10 years, 17 million new consumers aged 20 over will arrive in Vietnam.
That's 17 million.
17 million new consumers. People are living longer, and obviously after the American War in Vietnam, there was a baby boom, and it's those baby boomers are now sort of just about to turn 20, or 25. So again, there's 65% of the population that is actually of consumer age. So that's quite strong.
That's
that works
a huge
out
consumer
to
market, isn't it?
56 million people. Yeah.
56 million people in the consumer market. That's a big opportunity for anyone who is going to invest into Vietnam. And how does that affect the development of different sectors and the product categories in Vietnam?
The population of Vietnam, the young population of Vietnam, has sort of grown up with MTV culture, if you will. Okay, so things like mobile phones, the latest motorcycles, internet, branded clothing, all these type of sectors are really starting to flourish here. Obviously, young people don't have the big money that older people do. So, you know, if we're talking about cars or if we're talking about real estate or so on and so forth, that hasn't been affected that much. But if we look at the biggest growing sectors, right now the biggest growing sector in Vietnam is telecoms by far. FMCG is growing at over 15%. what we're seeing today is Vietnamese are becoming more busy, okay? Because they become more busy, they look for convenience, whether it's instant coffee or what have you. They're looking at indulgence. They're working quite hard. So maybe going for a holiday or a spa or something that is pampering to yourself. I guess the major trends are health, convenience, indulgence. A new one is what we call sort of self-expression or differentiation. I wouldn't say that the luxury market is the absolute opportunity, but there certainly is an opportunity in luxury as well.
What are opportunities for Vietnam in terms of the emerging middle class?
If you take a look at national Vietnam, in other words, the whole country, 63% of the population is what we call bottom of the pyramid. Okay. Now, this means that they're making under $200 a month. Okay. So that's a huge opportunity for mass quality or mass products. Okay. You've got about another quarter, 25%, which are middle class. And these are the people that can afford sort of almost any kind of basic product that you could in the US or the UK, because prices for those products very often are quite a bit cheaper here. Perfect example, you might pay $1 for a can of Coke in the US or Australia, and here you know, for a bottle of Coke you pay about 20 cents. And then you've got the upper class, and here we're talking about people, households that are making $500, $600, $700, $800 a month or more, even up, well, I mean, substantially more. But then you've got about 10 to 12% there. So obviously, Vietnam has come from a very low base. When I arrived here, 62% of the population was living on or below the poverty line. Today, that figure is about 14 to 20% based on how you look at inflation. Okay, but having said that, you've got you've already got 35% of the total national population, which you could consider what we consider in Canada or North America as lower middle class. And then if you think you've got 35% of 86 million people, that's a substantial market. Absolutely.
Vietnam is still one of the few emerging Asian countries with the percentage of urban population under 30% of the total population. This, together with the extreme north, south, and central regional differences, make Vietnam a market to watch in terms of marketing and distribution. The two mega cities are Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh City is referred to as the commercial hub, while Hanoi, the capital city, is known as the political and cultural hub of the country. 78% of the rural population are earning less than 3 million dong, which is equal to about $150 per month. In urban areas, which takes up only about 30% of the population, however, the percentage of Class E and F with less than $150 household income per month stays as low as 28%. Therefore, market size will vary according to which consumer classes you're targeting. If you're targeting the ABC classes of Vietnam with household income of 6.5 million dong, equal to about $325 and above per month, Vietnam is only a 9 million population market, living mainly in urban areas. If you are targeting the bottom of the pyramid with a low-cost approach, however, the market can be as big as 56 million population market, living mainly in rural areas. There is certainly an emerging middle class that takes up 26% of the population with household income level from 3 million to 6.5 million dong, which is about $150 to $325, living mainly in urban areas. This income class is normally referred to as the aspirational consumers, who will be moving into the upper classes in the future as the economy grows. I wonder though what the wealth distribution is like, so probably it would be best for you to give us an overview of the GDP of Vietnam, GDP growth rate, inflation rate from 2005 to date, and probably a forecast up to 2020.
For those of you watching at home or at work, forecasting is like throwing darts in Vietnam, so it's actually a very difficult thing to do. But having said that, Vietnam has had the third fastest GDP growth rate in all of Asia, just in the last 4 or 5 years. Incomes have doubled in Vietnam. That's almost unheard of. Mind you, we're coming from a very small base, but just even without using research figures, my salary costs for a white-collar service operation have doubled in 5 years. But then again, our business has also doubled in 5 years, so it's all quite relative. The one big problem that Vietnam faces is trying to curb inflation. Historically, inflation has been anywhere from sort of 3 to 8% here over the last 5-6 years. However, in 2008, it reached 23%.
23%?
Yeah. And that was largely due to speculation in the market. People were actually going to the bank, borrowing money to play on the stock market, things like this. So it was a crazy year. We recently did a survey and took all the various figures from The Economist and the World Bank and so on and so forth and did some calculations. And there's a new top 6. We've all heard of BRIC, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Well, there's now a next top 6, and that's called CIVET. So that stands for Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa. These economies have been selected as the emerging economies for a lot of the reasons that we've already sort of started to discuss. So what I did, we took a look at growth rates up to 2020. And for example, at present, the average individual in China on an annual basis is doing about $6,000 as an income level. Okay, by 2020, that looks to double to 12,700. Vietnam seems to have the second highest growth of those countries, where today we're looking at 2,800 as an annual income and going up to 4,600. And then that's followed by Indonesia and India. So that's quite a surprising number, if you will. But again, when I see the growth that Vietnam has experienced just in the last 5 to 10 years, it would not shock me if those numbers actually become reality up to 2020.
2020 is actually another 10 years from now, and the growth, according to our guest speaker here, would be phenomenal as well in Vietnam. So how do you see that affecting the growth of income in Vietnam?
We are actually already, in urban Vietnam, you already have 37% of the population that can afford what most other people can anywhere else in the world, which is quite a significant figure. So the middle class is what I believe will actually push and drive Vietnam, not the upper class, not the luxury. It's that midsection, because that's where you're going to get the bulk of your spend coming from. So that's really where I see the future.
5 years ago, the most desired items for an average Vietnamese consumer in urban areas are still very much basic. And by that it means rice cooker, color TV, gas cooker, telephone and fridge. 5 years later, all the basic needs are fully recovered, and we see the needs for ownership upgrade move to new and high-tech items such as DVD, washing machine, personal computer, aircon and microwave. Together with that emerge a series of electrical retailers across the country. To service the emerging middle class and the upper classes, with 30% disposable income, of which only 50% is for saving, branded products are also started making their entry into the market. You can easily spot such brands as Gucci, LV, Burberry, Virtu along the glamorous shopping streets in the 2 megacities of the country. Increase in disposable income has certainly fueled growing domestic consumption. Another reason, however, that most research data won't reveal is the psychological factor. For a long time, Vietnamese consumers were deprived of the luxury of shopping for anything beyond their basic needs due to the difficult economic condition of the country in the post-war period. Back then, all disposable income goes to saving for a rainy day and the future generation. As such, the consumer market was a price-sensitive and functional-driven market. Nowadays, with money to spend after having saved what is required and with confidence in the future economy of the country, it is pure joy and satisfaction for people to start looking beyond the basic needs. It's very aspirational for the middle class to actually emerge and become upper class sort of thing in the near future. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, aspiration has been sort of the cornerstone of the society and for the last 5 years. So if we talk about brands, in the past, a mobile phone was not a brand, it was a communication device. Yeah. Today, a mobile phone actually tells someone who you are. So If you have a Nokia that's sort of young, it's about collecting people. If you have a Motorola, it's more about business. If you have a, what's it called, a Viet 2 or whatever else, the $4,000 to $6,000 mobile phone, it means I'm rich. Yeah. So brands have become an extension of the aspirational status that people want to portray to the rest of the community. So brands are actually becoming very important as the leading driver behind that.
How do you put Vietnam in regional perspective in terms of disposable income?
I think the best way to answer that is by actually talking about Southeast Asia. Okay, so here we're talking about Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam. In the old days, they used to call those the new Asian tigers. Okay, and Vietnam was always considered the tiger tail. Okay, today, in terms of disposable income, the average Vietnamese person already has something like 35% disposable income. The average Vietnamese is saving around 15% of their income. Okay, in other words, for example, 90% of Vietnamese own their homes almost outright, which means if you go to the West, everybody's paying mortgages and car loans and whatever else. Because the home is more or less already bought and paid for, even though they don't make a lot of money, what they have left is fairly, you know. So if I take a look at it from what I recall, about 35% is still spent directly just on food, on eating every day, okay? You've got transportation, healthcare, so on and so forth, but those things are actually quite small relative to the pie. So in terms of disposable income, it's actually quite high, but the amount is not nearly as much as what we're accustomed to.
But then I wonder, with the 70-30% rural and urban split, is there going to be any challenges for investors in terms of distribution channel?
Absolutely. Let me start off by the urban side of the equation. 15 years ago, there was no such thing as modern trade here. So your Tesco's, Walmart's just didn't exist. It was all what we call your traditional ma and pa stores. Okay, that started to change when the likes of Metro came in about 6-7 years ago. Today, modern trade already compromises 20% of the total value spend in urban Vietnam.
That's 20%.
20% already. Mind you, under the WTO accession, there's some issues there where it's still difficult to be able to open up beyond one store, but that's changing. And on the rural side, it really still, that's where there is a big issue, because 95% is your traditional trade. And obviously, in urban Vietnam, things like refrigeration, the distances between distribution points, POS points, all that is quite diversified. So it's harder to obviously distribute, and it costs more to distribute in rural Vietnam. But that's starting to change. And it's companies like Coca-Cola and Unilever who have done a really good job. And what they've been able to do is they've been able to get a multitude of product into the same shop. So, you know, if you're carrying, let's say, Coke, yes, you have Coke, but then you also have water, you have juice, you have... So it's multitude of product lines that come in all at the same time, and therefore you're able to maximize the distribution count that you have.
Let's go into the two key cities of Vietnam, which we mentioned earlier, and which can be really interesting. As you mentioned, there would be various differences between the north and the south, or Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. Can you give me a bit of perspective on that?
Even after 35 years of reunification, there still are differences. But those differences are much more psychological than they are anything else. And I think maybe the best way to start off is if you ask, but how a Hanoian, say, considers wealth is they will actually look at their next door neighbor. I'm going to see how successful I am based on what my neighbor has. Right. Okay. While in Saigon, it's much more practical. They open their wallet and see how much money is in there. Okay. So the one is much more about face, while the other one is much more about practicality. Hanoians are actually much more quality conscious because in the past they had products from the Warsaw Pact countries like Cuba and Bulgaria and whatnot, which weren't of very high quality. Hanoians would prefer to buy the most expensive beer, say, and only have one, All right, while in Saigon, they love to sit down and chum a chum, which means drink 100%. So
wouldn't you like to be in the South?
I've been living in the South for 16 years. Yes, I like my chum and chum. But I would say in the North, it's really much more about status, okay, because the North historically was much poorer, all right? And in the South, it's much more about functionality and practicality. And I think in the South has had so much Western or foreign influence over the years. They've become much more practical. And, you know, pardon to any of the hotels in either North or South Vietnam, but service in the South is substantially better. In both markets, price is still important. And I think to emphasize Vietnam in general, there's a great quote from one of my staff years and years ago, and that was, cheap no good, good no cheap. So they certainly understand that quality costs money. And if we look at it from a Hanoi versus Ho Chi Minh City perspective, recently one of our respondents in a focus group said, Hanoians will earn 10 and spend 1. Okay? Saigonese will earn 10 and spend 11. All right? So it shows you a little bit of the difference in the psychological makeup of the people.
So which such differences coexist in Vietnam between two different markets? What are the directions in terms of marketing and branding, do you think?
Because the functionality, the efficacy of a brand is much better understood in the South. In the North, the aspiration of a brand is very important. An example is you talk to someone who has a Rolex or a Breitling or whatever, they don't say they're wearing a watch. They're wearing a Breitling. While in the South, it's like, well, hey, a watch is a watch. It tells time. Yeah. I just need something that's suitable to me.
Okay.
Yeah. But going back to the brand context, in general, Southerners actually understand brands better. Okay. While in the North, it really is about the Joneses. It's about showing off. It's about comparing yourself with others. So the brand becomes a ladder of success or aspiration. While in the South, it's more a brand that's more about the suitability. You know, and that is quite a significant difference. To be honest with you, most of our clients do not have the budgets in Vietnam to run two types of campaigns. But we do have quite a famous watch client who actually is doing completely different marketing in the North compared to the South, understanding that psychological difference. Vietnam media is very diversified and very segmented. So you can actually plan your campaigns by different regions by using different TV stations. So you actually can drive a different message home in different regions. That's quite possible here.
That's very interesting. So how do you think companies that want to apply a pan-Asia strategy going to do business in Vietnam?
I think in the past, everybody went, oh, Vietnam's opening up. Hey, we've got this great ad from Thailand or from China or from Singapore, and we'll just bring it in here, put a voiceover, superimposition, subtitle, and off we go. Yeah. They were highly unsuccessful.
Okay.
They were highly unsuccessful for two reasons. In the old days, if you had an ad that was considered quite aspirational in Singapore, the Vietnamese sort of looked at the ad and went, I'll never get there. So it actually has no sense or has no contact point to me. Okay? Vietnam has got a 4,000-year history and a very, very, very rich history. Vietnamese are some of the most proud people on earth. You have to Vietnamize your content here. Okay?
Vietnamize, that's the key word.
Vietnamize. If you want to, look, shampoo is shampoo. It cleans hair, it makes it shiny, it makes it look fuller, whatever. But they're all aware of that. But then how do you say it in what fashion to make it suitable, believable, aspirational, and obviously to persuade. Aspirational is at a very different level here than in other markets. It's not really subtle aspiration. You have to understand that we've got an incredibly young population here.
It has to be really expressive.
Which is not very sophisticated necessarily. So you actually have to make your ads work for you in the market.
Vietnam certainly is a very unique market that is on the rise. Whether you are looking at Vietnam in a regional perspective or as a key market for your company, it is essential that you do proper research to gain a good understanding of the market. Thank you very much, Raf, for being here today to provide us with valuable insights into Vietnam. If you have any question for Raf or for Inside Vietnam, please send it to phi@insidevietnam.com.vn. You can also check for past episodes and information about the show at Inside Vietnam on eBlog, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. See you again in 2 weeks with our very interesting new episode that will take you on a journey to gain insight into the life, the values, the aspirations, usage, and image of the young consumers of Vietnam. My name is Phi Nguyen and I'm your host on Inside Vietnam. Goodbye and see you again soon.